Hey, I want to welcome back a friend of mine, former state representative Charlie Fuqua is back with us. Charlie, how are you, sir?
I am good today. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic, sir. I'm doing fantastic. Hey, let me ask you something. Being a former state representative down at the Capitol, I mean, we got a ton of corruption that seems to be like in the headlines every single day about this guy getting bribed and that guy getting bribed, and people are now starting to go to jail. When you were down there, did you sense that level of corruption was going on?
If it was, well, actually, while I was there, two state reps went to prison. So I guess it was. As a matter of fact, I asked one guy, Lloyd George was his name, and I believe he did. But anyway, I said to him one time, I heard all kinds of stories about corruption with money and women and everything, and I don't see any of that. Why is that? And he says, it's because of the press. The press tells everything we do. So it may be better than it used to be.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. That is a scary thought if that's true.
Yeah. So when I was there was corruption. I didn't see it. I think the corrupt people knew not to approach me, so I never had any offers or anything, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. That tends to be what happens. If they know your values, your principles, you're not even going to get approached because they're afraid you're going to go, tell on them or rat on them and that sort of thing. All right. Well, so anyway, former state representative Charles Fuqua, we always love having you on. I've really appreciated. I've been to some of the Northeast Arkansas Tea Party events that you've presented at. First of all, how are things in Independence County right now? How's the Republican committee in Independence County doing?
Well, just a few years ago, we were a solid Democrat county. Now we have one Democrat on the quorum court, and when he's gone, there won't be a single elected Democrat representing our county, all the way from Donald Trump down.
Wow. That is certainly, part of this shift. It's kind of maybe I think we all experience, especially people in Northeast Arkansas with the election of Barack Obama. That's kind of what triggered the reddening, if you will, of the state of Arkansas.
Now what we got to do is make sure we get Republicans that aren't corrupt.
This is true. This is true in light of the front page being that, orthodontist was bribing, Jeremy Hutchinson to change the laws. So, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, Charlie.
Yeah. Corruption goes in both parties. It's money that corrupts.
It certainly is. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, one of the things that you've talked about before, we've talked about fractional reserve banking, speaking of money. We've also, I've heard that presentation, but, you put out an email. You put out an email that I got this weekend that I thought was very interesting about globalism in and of itself. This used to be a word, globalism, that you didn't really hear hear very often. But now you hear it all the time in terms of, nationalism, the idea of individual countries being sovereign and looking out for their own people versus this idea of globalism that in order to have comes at the expense of people and nations.
Yeah. I've been listening to Rush Limbaugh talking about how the globalist elite want to get rid of Donald Trump. And what they hate about Donald Trump is he is a white nationalist. Now, what does that mean? Well, he's a white guy, okay? And he's for nationalism. He believes that there should be nations. And that's what cannot be tolerated. By the way, they can't tolerate black nationalists or Hispanic nationalists. They just want to do away with all nations and all borders. And that's why we see this flood of people from third world countries into Europe and the United States. It's to dilute the population so that the people will be willing to give up their nation and go into a one-world government. And as a matter of fact, what Rush Limbaugh is right spot on in everything he's saying, but he will not, and I think for good reason, because he's afraid he'll be taken off the air. He will not identify who these globalist elite are. And who they are is they are the international bankers headed by the Rothschilds, and their spokesman is George Soros. He's the mouthpiece for them. And we need to understand that, because how can these people have so much impact unless they've got financial power? And it's our banking system, and it's not just the United States, it's worldwide, that gives them so much power. And I just try to get people to understand how that system works, because most people don't understand it. And I want to say this. What really kicked this off in my mind is I have a nephew who's a bright kid. Actually, he's a great nephew. And he just graduated from college, from a state university, with a degree in finance, and he's taken a job at a bank. And I asked him, where does money come from? And he said, the government prints it. And, you know, I know that's what most people believe, but I wouldn't have expected somebody that just got a degree in finance to give me that answer. And here's why that's so bad, that that's what people believe. And it is that all money in existence is created by banks out of nothing. It's just accounting entries, and it's loaned into existence. And before I explain that, let me say this, too. History shows that the Rothschilds, through their agent Jacob Schiff, an American banker, financed the communist revolution. The Rothschilds financed the rise of Hitler. They are now financing the rise of radical Islam, because communism has failed, and they want a totalitarian ideology that they can use to propel them to this one-world government. Islam... Go ahead.
I do want to point out, Charlie, that you said that Rush won't identify him because he's afraid to get kicked off the air, and then you identify him. I'm not afraid, though. I'm not afraid. I think that's great.
I figured you wouldn't be, or you wouldn't have called me.
That's exactly right.
And you know, I guess there's a possibility you could get kicked off the air. But I want to explain.
All this stuff is more mainstream, and you mentioned real quick. First of all, just look at what's going on. I mean, if people want to know about globalism, you mentioned immigration. Third world countries going into these developing nations. There's an immigration crisis in almost every developed nation. So somebody's financing that, because that's not a coincidence. There's just no way that you're going to get me to believe that that's all a coincidence, that all these countries now are having this crisis at their border.
Yep.
Anyway,
well,
go ahead.
I want to get in. I want to explain where money comes from, because most people don't understand where it comes from. There's two levels of money creation. It's at the Federal Reserve, or central bank level, and this isn't just our country, it's worldwide. And then, and this is what keeps it hidden from people, it's also in the local commercial banks. People think that when they go to the bank to get a loan, that savers have put money in savings accounts, and then they're borrowing that money. And that's not what's happening at all. For one thing, nobody puts money in a savings account anymore, because a savings account is paying, what, 0.2%, and inflation's 3%? It's a losing proposition. So how the system works is, our system is called fractional reserve banking. And this system comes to us from ancient Babylon. That's how old it is. But anyway, the way it works today is people put money in their checking accounts, demand deposits. And if the reserve ratio set by the Federal Reserve is, say, 1 to 10, and last time I checked, that's about what it was, for every $1 million of average daily balance that a bank holds in checking accounts, it can loan out $10 million. Well, now you say, how does it loan out more money than it's got? When a bank makes a loan and they write you the check for that loan, They create that money right there on the spot out of nothing. Well, some people would say they do it with their excess reserves. But they create that money, they loan it to you. Now, what we need to understand is when that money is paid back to the bank, that money is destroyed. It goes out of existence. It was created out of nothing, so when you pay them back, it goes out of existence. But here's the key. The bank earns interest on that money. Okay, now the other level of money creation is when the federal government borrows from the Federal Reserve, which is owned by member commercial banks.
Can I stop you for a second because I have a question? I have a question. So what's the difference between that, what you just described at the local banking level, and say like your traditional Bailey savings and loan?
Okay, that is a really good question. Okay, the Bailey savings and loans was what everybody believes is happening now. People put money into a savings account. They pay the savers one rate of interest, loan that money out at a higher rate of interest, and the bank makes their profit off the difference. Pre-1980, savings and loans were everywhere in this country, and they were doing a great job and performing a great service to the community, but the banking law of 1980 drove them all out of existence. There's none left.
So that's what people think is going on now with banks, but that's not what's going on. I mean, because
that's not what's going on. No, and by the way, prior to 1980, banks were already doing what they're doing now. Okay. But they had competition from savings and loans. And the inflation rate wasn't near as high as it is. Okay, now let me go into the second level. The second level is, now remember, the member commercial banks, and not all commercial banks are members of the Federal Reserve, but the member commercial banks own the Fed. It is not a government agency. That is a misconception. And what happens when the government deficit spends, it borrows directly from the Fed. The Fed creates the money by crediting the government's checking account. The money's just created out of nothing, and that money is loaned to the government at interest. Then the people are taxed to pay interest on that debt. Now, this is important. That debt's never paid off. It just keeps growing. So the interest is basically compounding on that. So think about this. All money in existence is created at one of those two levels, either when the Fed loans to the government or when the commercial banks loan to the people.
Wow.
That means all money has to be paid back to the banking system plus interest. How do you pay the money creator more money than it has created? It can't be done. So the only thing that can happen is the money supply must constantly be expanded. And as the money supply is constantly expanded, remember, loans are always being paid off, so money's always being destroyed. So you have to constantly be creating a larger supply of loans and money to pay off the old loans as they come due. So what we have, when you expand the money supply, you have inflation, which means the value of the money is constantly falling. But so what do you have? Who has money? It's mainly older people because they've been working to save it all their lives. So what you're doing, you are destroying the savings of our senior citizens. And at the same time, you're loading an ever-increasing debt burden on future generations.
Wow.
So our money system is based on debt. Debt is everything. If there was no debt, there'd be no money.
Wow.
And this is what most people don't understand. As a matter of fact, most bankers have no understanding of this.
Yeah, some of them might be figuring out for the first time that they are creators and destroyers of money.
Yeah. Now, I have talked to bankers that do understand it, and here's what they say. They say, we are the most regulated industry in the world, and that's true. But when the regulations allow you to create money, you're going to follow those regulations, and banks meticulously follow the regulations. I mean, there is no group of people that follow the regulations. And think about this. If your checking account balance is off and you and the bank disagree, who's normally right?
Yeah, the bank. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're meticulous about getting this right.
Yeah, definitely.
But the system is so much to their advantage.
Can I ask you
they're
this?
going to be meticulous.
Well,
yeah.
Can I ask you this about, these current events, and the president and the Fed? The president's relationship with the Fed is certainly one, I think, that is different than other presidents in the Fed, wanting them to, do this or that to the rates. Some people have always said that, the Fed needs to be audited. A lot of people think if they ever are audited, the Fed will be no more. So what are your thoughts about how...
Wait a minute. You just said something that the listeners really need to understand. The Fed was created over 100 years ago. It creates our money supply, and it has never been audited. Let that sink in a little bit. Mm-hmm. Is that incredible?
It really is. But what do you think? With Trump and what he's attempting to do, is he trying to reform this in any way, or is he just trying to get the interest rates cut so the economy does better? What are your thoughts?
Okay, first of all, I find that there are so few people that understand the banking system. I don't know if Trump has any understanding of the banking system or not. It is possible that he doesn't, but let me tell you this. Donald Trump is a genius. He is a very intelligent man, and he may well understand this system, but he may also know the power of the banking system, and he may be afraid to directly take it on in his first term. Okay? But he knows that the Fed can destroy his presidency by bringing on a recession. All they got to do is tighten the money supply. What is a recession? It's when the growth of the money supply slows down. That's a recession.
Yeah.
So the Fed has the power. So he is using the power of the bully pulpit of the presidency to put pressure on the Fed to lower the interest rate and loosen up the money supply so that we don't have a recession. But remember, as we loosen up the money supply, we have inflation.
Yeah, yeah. It certainly is fascinating. But I appreciate your time with us, former state representative Charles Fuqua. I kind of feel like we have those, or I know we have those on the left who are wanting a recession, so they would want the Fed to do what they need to do, make a political calculation. But hey, you know what I've realized here, Charlie? I've realized that if money is just created, we've got a lot of corrupt politicians that are chasing imaginary, just something that's just imaginary. They want they want this money, but
politicians, we all chase it.
Oh, I know we all do, but I just think it's kind of funny when you think about listening to your description of it. How it just has value because we say it has value, and all it really is a digitized representation on a screen, a bunch of ones and zeros. Yeah,
but that'll buy me a new car.
It will. This is true.
Can I mention one other thing? I've written a book. The name of the book is God's Law, the Only Political Solution. My name is Charles R. Fuqua. It's available. You can get it from me. And my email is charlesrfuqua@gmail.com. Or you can get it on Amazon. Just put in my name and the name of the book, God's Law, the Only Political Solution. And what I believe is, if we would just follow God's law, the Ten Commandments, all of our problems would disappear. And why do I believe that? Because God promised it. And God keeps his promises.
Well, he certainly does. Charlie, I appreciate it, sir. It's always great to talk to you.
Okay. Are we finished?
We are. We're finished. We're gonna.
Okay, I'll let you go.
All righty. Thank you, sir. Folks, we're going to be back here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.